From a young age, I always felt like I was second best, like a shadow that was always trailing behind someone brighter and more beloved. My name is Anne. I am the younger of 2 daughters in our family, and for as long as I can remember, I have stood in the glow of my older sister Stacy. I always felt as though I was in the background. The stark contrast in the way our parents treated my sister and me was unmistakable and impossible to overlook. While Stacy was escorted to singing competitions and exclusive gatherings at my parents' club, I was left behind at home, quietly working on my homework in solitude. Being 3 years older than me, she naturally stood out and commanded attention wherever she went. It was as if she was destined to receive all the attention, treated like it was her rightful due. Because of that, it always felt like my parents' focus was solely on her. If a teacher mentioned her talent, my parents never missed the chance to nurture it. They did everything they could to bring out the best in her, while I felt like I was hidden in the shadows. Our family was not financially well off, making it difficult to afford Stacy's lessons and equipment. However, her singing voice was so captivating that my mother proudly boasted about her talent to everyone, believing she would achieve great success in the future. On the other hand, whenever I tried to show my own talents, I felt discouraged from expecting too much. When I told my mother about my interest in art, she gave a faint, apologetic smile and replied hesitantly, "Let's hold off until next semester. Stacy's vocal lessons are already costing us a lot." The disparity became even more pronounced when Stacy entered her senior year of high school. One evening when I was 15, during dinner, my parents revealed a big decision they had made. "We've been saving up carefully," they explained. Then my father added proudly, "We've decided to send Stacy to Preston College." It was one of the most prestigious schools in the state. Excitement was written all over Stacy's face. "That's absolutely wonderful," my mother added enthusiastically. "And that's not all. You can use our apartment near the campus. You won't have to worry about rent and can focus entirely on your studies." Upon hearing this, I silently pushed the peas around on my plate. There was no need to hide how I felt, because no one cared about me anyway. All the attention in our house was directed toward Stacy's bright and cheerful face. Her smile stood out, and it felt as though my existence was fading away. That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear Stacy talking excitedly about her dreams. She spoke animatedly about her future plans and aspirations, while my mind began calculating. Having seen how much money my parents had spent on Stacy's tuition and living expenses, along with providing her a free apartment, I started to think calmly about how I could fund my own education. Gradually, I began to realize that in this situation, I couldn't expect the same kind of support. When I fully grasped that reality, it hit me hard. But instead of breaking down in tears, I started planning my next steps. The next day, I decided to visit my grandparents' antique shop. When I explained my situation to my grandfather, he listened intently. "Anne, if you're serious about this, I might be able to help a little with your college expenses," he said. He rested his hand on his chin thoughtfully, pausing for a moment. "But I think it would be good for you to gain some experience earning your own money. How about working here after school?" And so, everything began to move forward. While Stacy was busy packing for her prestigious university, I started working at the antique shop every afternoon after school. At the shop, I helped organize inventory, assisted with catalog creation, and even interacted with customers. Under my grandfather's guidance, I gradually learned the basics of running a business and developed new skills. Meanwhile, my grandmother warmly supported my busy days, often bringing me snacks and sharing stories about the history of the vintage items in the shop. Through those stories, I learned the importance of an item's value and history, and I slowly began to understand the significance of the work I was doing. When I told my parents about my decision to save up for college on my own, they didn't seem surprised. Instead, they looked relieved, as though they were reassured by my determination to find my own path. The 3 years I spent working at my grandparents' antique shop turned out to be incredibly valuable and meaningful to me. Every afternoon, I diligently dusted old furniture and meticulously sorted through vintage jewelry at the shop. Over time, without realizing it, I developed a keen sense of efficiency and an appreciation for aesthetics. By the time I graduated high school, I had managed to save enough money from my earnings to fund my college education. It was also thanks to my grandparents paying me a higher hourly wage than others. That seemed to be their way of showing kindness. My graduation celebration wasn't a flashy event, just a quiet dinner with my family, but it felt like enough. I took immense pride in having worked hard to get this far without relying on any special assistance. For college, I chose a local state university and opted for a practical business program that allowed me to make the most of my savings. Through this choice, I felt confident about taking the first solid step toward my future career. The tuition at the state university was affordable, and I was even able to save a little money. I continued living at home and took the bus to campus, a modest choice but a logical one to reduce financial strain. "Dad, Mom," I began one evening, summoning my courage. "I'm thinking of buying a used car. It would make getting to class a little easier." Without lifting his gaze much from his smartphone, my father replied flatly, "Sorry, Anne. We don't have the means right now." My mother quickly added, as if to smooth things over, "Isn't the bus enough? Plenty of students use it." Reflecting on all the support they had given me so far, I found myself unable to respond. Instead, I silently carried a deep sense of gratitude in my heart. There were countless moments when I felt how fortunate I was to have their support. Each time, an inexpressible sense of thankfulness would well up inside me. Stacy had gotten her driver's license a long time ago, and I still vividly remember the time she received her car. Back then, I had just finished my first year of college and was relieved to have made it through my spring finals. But at that time, our house was filled with a special excitement and energy. The reason was that Stacy had finally graduated from Preston College and was about to move on to the next stage of her life. To celebrate Stacy's graduation, my parents organized an elaborate party, inviting relatives, friends, and neighbors. The days leading up to the event were a flurry of preparations, with every detail carefully planned. On the big day, the house was alive with activity, buzzing with people who had come to honor Stacy's success. It was filled with cheerful smiles, lively conversations, and an atmosphere of pure celebration. I was in the kitchen, engrossed in arranging appetizers on plates, when Stacy suddenly walked into the room. Next to her was Joe, the boyfriend she had dated during her college years. The two of them entered the room, leaning into each other as if they didn't have a care in the world. The scene was like something straight out of a movie, with natural smiles spreading across both Stacy and Joe's faces. Everyone around was captivated by their glow, and in no time, their presence commanded the room's attention. As they entered, Stacy addressed everyone gathered with a cheerful expression. "I'm engaged to Joe." The room erupted in cheers and congratulations, suddenly filling with a warm and bright atmosphere. Mom, overwhelmed with emotion, had tears welling up in her eyes as she looked at Stacy. Dad, on the other hand, expressed his joy by giving Stacy a hearty pat on the shoulder. The pat was so forceful that for a moment I worried Stacy might lose her balance. Still, in that moment, family and friends celebrated together, and a warm sense of unity filled the air. However, even in this joyous moment, an unexpected event was still waiting to unfold. The surprising moment came when Joe began to speak. He started talking in a gentle, sweet voice, and his words surprised everyone and left a lasting impression. After the wedding, we're planning to move to Connecticut. My parents run a very successful business there, and they've invited us to join them. We're set to take it over. Hearing this, Mom's tears flowed even more freely, falling in large drops. "My daughter and her husband are embarking on such an amazing path," she murmured emotionally. Dad puffed out his chest and said in a proud, booming voice, "I always knew you'd achieve something great." I stood quietly in the corner of the room, watching the scene unfold. No one seemed to acknowledge that I had completed my first year with a perfect 4.0 GPA, all while juggling school and a part-time job at a local cafe. But I had grown accustomed to that. During my second year of college, much of my time was spent helping prepare for my sister's wedding. Even so, I diligently pursued my studies and progressed. My parents devoted themselves to planning a perfect wedding for their child. They took out substantial loans for the venue, catering, flowers, music, and more. No expense was spared for Stacy and Joe. The wedding itself was a grand and emotional affair, with Stacy shining as the star of the day. After paying for my bridesmaid dress myself, I wore it proudly and watched my parents dance happily, feeling proud of them. They had spared no expense in creating a wonderful wedding. After Stacy and Joe moved to Connecticut, I understood the reality that my parents would be repaying the loans for years. That evening, as I was watching TV, Mom came up to me and said, "I need you to start paying for living expenses." I was a little taken aback by the sudden request. What brought this on? I almost blurted out the thought in my head, "You gave Stacy a free apartment." Dad sat uneasily in the recliner he rarely used. The wedding loans were still outstanding. Even though they had a little breathing room now, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I spoke with a slight tremble in my voice. "I've never once asked you for anything. I've worked part-time to pay for my tuition and taken the bus everywhere." Mom raised her hand to stop me. Then she and Dad exchanged a silent look, the kind they often shared when deciding how much to spend on Stacy's other activities. After a while, I responded, "Fine." Mom said I would need to pay $1,300 a month. I wanted to argue further, but I knew it would be pointless. "All right, I'll pay $1,300 a month." From that month on, I began paying $1,300 in living expenses each month. To afford it, I picked up extra shifts at the cafe. I often worked between classes or stayed until closing. Balancing work and studies left me with almost no time to sleep. My final year of college passed in a blur, carrying textbooks and my cafe apron. Every night, I stayed up late studying. Before I knew it, graduation day arrived. While my classmates prepared for grand parties and celebrations, my parents decided on a quiet dinner at home, inviting only my grandparents. Unlike Stacy's lavish catering, we sat around the dining table eating homemade lasagna. Grandma reached across the table to gently take my hand. "Dearest Anne, I'm so proud of you," she said softly. "Graduating with top honors while working part-time is truly remarkable." Before I could respond, Mom's phone buzzed, and her face lit up as she read the message. "Speaking of success," Mom interjected, "Stacy just texted me. She said their business is doing great. They're planning to expand to 2 new locations." I watched as my graduation dinner transformed into a celebration of Stacy's success in Connecticut. Grandma and Grandpa exchanged glances as if they sensed something. Grandpa gently placed his hand on my shoulder. My hard work in college bore fruit sooner than expected. Less than 2 weeks after graduating, I was hired by Anderson Mitchell, one of the top firms in the city. The starting salary was higher than I'd imagined, and I felt excited about the career that lay ahead. Daily life soon settled into a routine, and I became deeply focused on proving my value at work. Still, every month, Mom reminded me about the living expenses. "Don't forget to pay on Friday. We're counting on that money." And just like that, 3 years went by. I received a major promotion and was assigned to work abroad for a year. For me, it was the perfect opportunity, not just professionally, but also to finally leave my parents' house. I could hardly contain my excitement. At last, I wouldn't have to stress about covering my living expenses anymore. Still, one lingering concern continued to weigh heavily on my mind. The matter centered around my dog, Max. Leaving Max behind was a bittersweet reality I had to face, but it was a necessary decision for the sake of my job. My biggest worry was finding the right person to take care of him in my absence. Max was an important part of my family, and I wanted to leave him with someone I trusted. After much deliberation, I decided to ask my parents to take care of him. I thought that would put my mind at ease, but another issue arose. My parents told me I'd need to pay $1,300 a month for Max's care. At first, I was shocked and wanted to push back. However, after hearing their reasoning, I began to understand their perspective. They explained that they had their own lives, and that taking in Max and caring for him long-term wouldn't be easy. They pointed out that caring for a dog required time and effort, including daily walks, meals and vet visits, which justified the cost. Although the expense felt burdensome, I realized that Max's health and happiness were my top priorities. I concluded that paying $1,300 a month was a necessary step to ensure Max was well cared for. Once the payments to my parents were settled, I began preparing for my new life overseas while keeping a watchful eye on Max's well-being from afar. During my assignment abroad, I heard the news that Stacy and Joe had welcomed a baby boy. I saw their photos shared on social media, but I never made the effort to visit them in person. By then, our interactions had dwindled to nothing more than the occasional birthday messages and Christmas greetings. That arrangement was working fine, but one phone call changed everything. "Anne." My mother's voice was trembling. "I need to talk to you about Stacy. There's been a problem, and it seems their business has collapsed. On top of that, Joe had a serious falling out with his parents. They're furious about how he managed things, and apparently they haven't spoken in days." I closed my eyes, sensing what was coming next. Stacy said she's coming back to live at home. She also mentioned something about Joe and the baby. "I see," I answered quietly. Mom seemed to be thinking for a moment. "Anne, is it okay if I clear out your room?" It sounded as though the decision had already been made. Stacy and Joe need to set up a nursery for Daniel. And where am I supposed to sleep when I return? "There's a perfect sofa in the living room," Mom replied. It seemed like the move was already finalized. "You're joking, right? Why my room?" Mom's tone turned sharp. "Stop being so selfish, Anne. Stacy has a baby. That baby needs a proper room." With those words, I had no choice but to accept that my room would be overtaken by a crib and other baby items. My belongings were hastily piled into a corner of the living room. With my sister's family moving back into the house, space became cramped, and that's when my parents brought up another demand. They wanted me to double the payment for Max's care. They argued that having Stacy's family around increased their workload, and the cost of caring for the dog needed to match that. The proposal left me both shocked and slightly perplexed. While I thought I could manage $1,300 a month, doubling that amount was far too much for me to bear. Additionally, with my sister's family moving back, I started to worry if Max could stay comfortable in the changing household environment. I told them I needed time to consider it, and then ended the call. That night, I turned on my computer and began searching for apartments. I shortlisted a few promising places within walking distance of my workplace. I told myself I needed to be prepared for the worst-case scenario. After careful consideration, I made a calm decision to leave home and take Max with me. Since my overseas assignment was nearing its end, it felt like the perfect timing. I was certain that bringing Max back to live with me was the best decision for him. When I shared my choice with my parents, their reactions were a mix of surprise and concern, but I stood firm and didn't waver. I genuinely believed that staying with me was what would make Max happiest. Later, I picked him up and moved into my new apartment. I ordered takeout and sat on the bare living room floor. The day I picked Max up from my parents' house was the last time I saw my family. I simply said goodbye and left. I didn't experience any guilt. I simply felt a sense of peace. In the calm of my new apartment, I spent quiet days settling in and adjusting to my new life. I bought a comfortable bed, a soft couch not meant for sleeping, and my own kitchen tools. Although I wasn't entirely used to the new place, work was going well, and Max and I enjoyed fulfilling days together. About a month later, my mother called me. Without any preamble, she launched into an angry tirade. "Why haven't you sent the money? Don't you think you should honor your promises?" she demanded. I laughed and replied, "What Stacy needs right now is to take full responsibility for herself. I've taken Max, moved out, and am paying rent for my own apartment, so I no longer have an obligation to pay living expenses. Stacy should be the one handling that." "What did you just say?" "Do you have any idea what kind of situation Stacy is dealing with right now?" "It doesn't matter to me what kind of situation Stacy is in. It's time for her to step up, work, and take responsibility for her own living expenses. I'll be keeping an eye on how things unfold." After I spoke, there was silence on the other end of the phone. I could feel the reality sinking into her mind, as if I could hear her organizing her thoughts. Her once steady source of income was gone, leaving only an unemployed daughter who had never paid a single bill. Anne. Suddenly, Mom's voice softened, with a sweetness I recognized from when she used to ask for favors when I was a child. "Don't rush. Can't we figure this out together? Why not come back home and live with us? That would be the fairest arrangement, wouldn't it?" I leaned back into the new couch I had carefully chosen for myself. This was my apartment, and no one could complain about anything here. "Sorry, but that's not happening." "But Anne, we're family, aren't we?" "Family?" I could hardly believe she had the audacity to say that. Without thinking, I cut her off mid-sentence. "Family? You tried to give my money to Stacy without telling me. You turned my room into a nursery and left me to cover all the bills by myself. You treated my life like an ATM and Stacy like royalty. How is that a family? Goodbye." I hung up and immediately blocked their number. That was 6 months ago. Grandma and Grandpa have kept me updated on their situation, but I never ask for details. They understand what I need and know that I made the right decision. Stacy, Joe, and Daniel still live at the house, contributing nothing to the household expenses. I've heard that my parents are struggling to get by with the loan still unpaid. They've even gone around asking relatives for money, but the truth about how they favored Stacy over me has spread. No one is willing to lend them anything. Of course, my grandparents haven't offered any support either. In fact, I've heard they've taken steps to ensure their inheritance doesn't go to my parents. Stacy, with a small child, still hasn't found a job, and Joe reportedly has no motivation to work. As for me, my new life is peaceful. I recently got another promotion at work, bought a new car, and started attending evening MBA classes. My apartment is always neat, with the fridge stocked full of fresh ingredients, ready for whenever I feel like cooking. Each night, I now drift off to sleep peacefully in my own bed. Just the other day, I bumped into one of Joe's relatives at the grocery store. She mentioned casually that they were expecting another baby. I responded with a simple smile and wished them all the happiness in the world. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I thought about how my parents might be figuring out how to cover daycare costs for the new baby. However, that's no longer something I need to worry about. For the first time, I'm putting myself first, and it feels undeniably like the right choice. Emotionally, it was a complex journey, but I stand firm in the path I chose and have no regrets about my decision. With Max by my side, I am genuinely content and excited about the new life that lies ahead.